G20 leaders plot central bank digital currencies and digital IDs worldwide. Sam, we've already done an episode where we talked about things ramping up, and we've talked about how during the lovely summer season when the children are off school, things kind of enter into this kind of calm lull. But already now the children have gone back to school. The online safety bill is flying through Parliament in the UK. The G20 are talking about central bank digital currencies, crypto getting regulated. There's all manner of things suddenly ramping up.
100%, Dan, and we talked about it, about the scare coming through, and then we're seeing all the things we talked about in the roadmap ramping up again, as you said, after those kind of summer lulls. So there's no surprise, but it's really important, like we said, to be prepared for that and to think about how we control our own emotions, control our own responses, and how we navigate that by staying sane, staying proactive, staying creative. And I think that's really where I want to take the discussion today, Dan.
Yeah, so I think we'll assess the kind of emerging situation in this episode. We'll touch on these emerging issues that are really important, and I think we'll touch on some of the solutions because I'm going to play a little bit here because in our last episode, we had people saying, "I've watched for 7 minutes. You guys haven't come up with any solutions," and I joked about it, and I said that God was given the grace in the Bible of having 7 days to create the earth, and we're expected in 7 minutes to come up with a solution. So I jest in a little way, but in many ways, what I want to extract is like, what is the nature of the problem, and then what is our connection to the problem, so that we can actually look at individual actions. Because there's almost like a desire, Sam, for like magic bullets. It's going to make the CBDCs go away, make the digital IDs go away, make the current leaders go away, and then some magic or new leader is going to come in and save us all. And I think that's easy thinking. It's also wishful thinking. It's magical thinking. So sorry to disappoint like anyone that's going to. And Sam and I also recognize, and we'll comment on this before we kind of get into the meat of the conversation, is that the holistic conversation that is necessary for these issues, to fully understand these issues, can't be done in a TikTok video. Although we're not going to be dancing, but we are going to be looking at how we can put our content on other platforms to reach other people.
Yeah, but with a clear intention to drive towards longer, nuanced conversations. That's the point. It cannot be shrunk down. I think that's the point, Dan. We're not going to try and shrink down such nuanced, complex conversations and solution-based thinking and creation into little clips. But absolutely, if we can reach more people that can come to these conversations, because that's what we've always said, Dan, we're passionate about getting a dialogue going, not about pontificating or something, but getting a dialogue going on a grounded level.
Absolutely. And I think we also have to take a zoom out look at what's going on here, because we've increased, our attention spans are becoming increasingly shrunk by, we went from like getting down to tweets of 140 characters or whatnot. People, it's almost like people want the answer in 140 characters or in a minute video. And it's our entire experience of the world is being driven by speed and ease and convenience and, the kind of on-demand instant gratification. And, we were at this wonderful Nourish dinner, and I was with Rich, who's one of the founders of Nourish, along with his twin brother, Nick, this morning. And we were talking about how someone said, we need some supplies, let's get a Deliveroo. And it was almost outside of their paradigm that we would, resort to something that is so instantaneous, but it's a reflection of how almost everything is about instant gratification.
Yeah.
We want answers immediately. And as a result, we're no longer willing to put in the work. And there is no such thing as an overnight solution, sadly.
No, Dan, what comes to me as you say that is I'm going to forget who the quote's by, but I absolutely agree, and I think most of our audience would agree that part of the problem is this very quick, very binary-led, hyperbolic sort of, quick, limited attention span society, and we're not going to find the solutions using the same energy. So it's almost requesting, the idea that's madness to think you create solutions with the same energy that created the problem. So we do need perhaps slower thinking and time to actually build over a longer period solutions to the problems we're faced with. And I think that's the problem, that, caught on that energy, but actually realizing sometimes when you're thinking, I need a quick solution to these problems, you're stuck in that same energy system. And I can't remember who the quote's by, Dan. It'll come to, I'm sure people will recognize it, is that, you need to look at using a different energy to look at the solutions to the problem.
Well, actually, there is a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which actually addresses this problem. And many of the problems that we face are driven by the fast thinking. And it's the fight or flight that comes from how we respond in the face of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And this is part of the reason why I wanted to bring this into the conversation. We are going to look at what some of the implications of the CBCDs are, sure, and the online safety bill, and reflect on my own emotional experience to it. So when I saw that the online safety bill was progressing so rapidly, instantly it puts me into frustration, anger, and I start to read about the implications because, of course, it's all written in legalese, which is very difficult for the average person to understand. But when you get between it, and particularly as someone who's a content creator, this bill directly affects my ability to speak freely online.
Yep.
Not just mine, but it's in an entire ecosystem of content creators and what's allowed and permitted on platforms. So instantly I go into right. But the problem is if I react out purely of fear, like the fear, there is a fear there. It would be wrong to ignore the fear, Sam, because the fear is, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? Like what could happen? It goes into, but the problem if I stay in fear, I start to project all the worst case scenarios that could emerge. And it's important to consider those worst case scenarios in many ways, but it takes us away from thinking slow, which is bringing it back to, okay, what are the likely scenarios, but also coming back to a sense of calm, because if there was a burning building, yes, you would be impulsed by the sight of the building. But if you rush into there without stopping to think, how am I going to tackle this situation? Coming back to slow thinking, stimulated by the fast thinking, then we'll often make decisions which is why almost we've gone into this fight or flight energy around every single issue. And you could argue that the online safety bill has got to the stage that it has, Sam, because of that fight or flight, because people have said we've been distracted by this and that, but that's what happens in fight or flight. It's like over here, it's like I call it whack-a-mole. It's like, here's an issue, go over there. Meanwhile, whilst that issue is playing out, something else is playing out, and it's almost utilized to distract people. And they always say, buses come in threes, and it's the same with problems like this, because they know, that if you, it's very difficult to get an organized strategy when there are so many things happening in a row, and that's what's happening now. But
totally done, yeah.
It's not just that strategic part; it's also our individual element of reacting from a place of fear and fight or flight. So, all of that fast thinking short form and disables our ability to think slow, to take a breath, to take stock, to really understand the terrain, and then formulate a path of action. And whether that's activist action, or whether it's something more creative, or whether it's something more individual around how we shape the culture in the world that we live in right now, either way, there is a multitude of solutions. So we're already at 7 minutes, Sam, and we've missed the deadline of coming up with the solution to all of the world's ills.
We should have had the panacea out, Dan, and round it up, and maybe put in a little link that you just click on and it's done. Yeah.
Do this one thing. Yes, it is the greatest marketing trick in the world, to be honest. We saw it with the COVID shots. It's like, just do this one thing and all your problems will go away and you'll be a good person. Like, is that what you want?
Again, that shows, Dan, they're offering that simplicity. I mean, again, based with all the lies and the deception, but that's what they're offering. And they're offering simplicity. And it's interesting, Dan, because I'm going to bring it just, these tangents come to my mind, but they're so reflective of what we talked about. That's why so many people do respond to simple instruction. And I've seen it even in my work with people in the crypto space, Dan, and why scammers have been so successful and are so successful, because they give very straightforward binary instructions. And when you're in a world of confusion, often people who are not sure where to go, what to do, they respond to that because it's very clear. Do this, do that, send this here, whatever. Whereas the sovereign path and doing things properly is you learning, you looking at what that means, you understanding what you've done or what you're going to do. So it's much more work. So I've been really fascinated on a psychological level, again, with no judgment, of seeing how successful they've been with people, because they are very clear. And it's a step-by-step, just do this, just do that, and you will then make this or make that. And there are guarantees, like the coding, do this action, very simply. Don't think about it. We're telling you what's good. You'll do it. You'll get the positive result. So that oversimplification, is the kind of easy world they build for people, built on lies and deception. But you can see why it works psychologically. And what we're talking about, the slow thinking, takes much more reflection and work. We've always talked about that. More freedom, more sovereignty, and solution to problems that exist for a long time is a longer term process. And I'm absolutely with you, Dan. We absolutely get, in the indignation and the outrage, and rightly so, and understandably so. And I always say this when I talk about this, I'm never belittling that. There is absolutely things to be feeling that, and it's very important. But it's how long do we stay there? How long do we move beyond it? Because staying there actually keeps us out of that creative mode, or even able to think clearly about solutions. So it's important to notice that, catch that, and move beyond it. And that's the process. So those are ports of call on the journey, but into action means we need to move beyond those things, because, as you said, the whack-a-mole situation is that the tricksters will never stop tricking, never stop bringing stuff up. So there will always be something to be indignant about or outraged by. So that can keep you on that roller coaster for forever. Potentially that's the worst case scenario, is you stay in that place forever. Whereas when do you move beyond, and into action? And I think that's what's really important, because the solutions are going to come from tangible action and moving forward.
Yeah, and there's a lot in this to unpack. So, now 10 minutes in, so sorry to disappoint, we haven't got the full big picture solution for you, but let's hopefully, for those of you who've made it this far and stayed this far, hopefully you'll just see that actually part of the solution is to take a step, to take a breath, and actually recognize that the things that we're actually seeking are actually part of the problem themselves. This kind of magic bullet thinking, this oversimplicity. What we're trying to bring here is an understanding of the complexity, so that we can actually therefore find simple, not simple but not easy, the simpler paths towards, or the middle path towards something that could actually create real impact. And it does start with us, because if we are supposedly awake, yet we are falling for the same patterns and kind of craving that fear-based fast thinking simplicity, then we're stuck in the system. We're really stuck in the matrix of it all, and we have to slow down. And we just published our interview with Neil Oliver, and Neil said that for some, freedom means freedom from responsibility, and actually the opposite is true. Freedom comes with great responsibility, and that's also a reflection of the time that people are, in the kind of fast-paced world. You see all the adverts like get rich quick, and it's like people want to become prosperous without doing the work. They want to be free from responsibility. Yet those who do become prosperous are the ones that take the harness, the wheel, and they go, I am going to take full responsibility for my own future. So, I know we want solutions to the political economic problems that we're facing. I get it. I do more than anyone else. But the first step is to recognize our own role that we play in that, I believe. And part of the solution is for us to take personal responsibility. And that is also taking responsibility for our mindset. So we can actually allow the fear of the situation to become a catalyst, but we can't stay there, because we do end up in fight or flight. And it's interesting. Fight or flight can take us down a path of nihilism, where we withdraw from the situation completely, or the fight energy, where we constantly are in the fighting the old. And again, I recognize that energy in myself. The online safety bill. I've just had a meeting this morning about very, very positive change-making activities that can contribute to the long-term future. Long-term future requires patience and building brick by brick, step by step. But I could easily now, within 5 minutes, get drawn away from that and pulled right back into the noise of the online safety bill. Now, I care very much about tackling that bill. I also care very much about tackling the underlying culture, because ultimately politics is downstream from culture. And we live in a world where, another variation of freedom is freedom from risk, and trying to remove all risk. But the hard thing to realize is removing all risks removes all freedom. So if your definition of freedom is a risk-free world, then actually there is no such thing as a risk-free world. Your risky is the new safe in many ways. So it's important that we recognize all these dynamics as they play out. Now, just coming on to the point of the kind of emergence of these things, Sam, we talked at it in previous episodes that we were in this summer lull, and things would ramp up. We've touched on it in previous episodes. I do have some ideas actually about how we can tackle both of these on a practical sense, and I'm happy to throw a bit of a conversation around that. But I do think it is important that we address a large part of this conversation around our own response and reaction, as we've touched upon. But what are we seeing? We're seeing the online safety bill coming through, the kind of global conversation about central bank digital currencies, and we've done an episode on this before, showing how rapidly it's proliferated. And that again comes with a response. What do we think about central bank digital currencies and what can be done. And even saying the word out loud, I know that I can see it in the comments. People saying, well, I can imagine it. We can't actually see the comments now. We're not recording live, but what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And it's an important question to ask, but it's also an important question to ask is what can I do about it?
Yeah.
What will I do? Because what the royal we, is often, again, displacing the responsibility outside of oneself.
100%, Dan, and we experienced it very viscerally at the Nourish community last week. I had the pleasure of going down there with you and seeing what the guys have created there and having discussions with them, and is a great example of what you've just talked about, because they absolutely, like us, shared that how much they were in outrage and indignation in 2020, and really vocal and really active discussing it, but then felt, well, what can we do? How can we get into creation? Now, we went there this past week, Dan, in 2023. That's 3 years later.
Yeah.
Now they are reaping the rewards. When I say reaping the rewards, not personally, but reaping the rewards in their community, and other people being able to reap the rewards of their work because they went into action for 3 years. Now that wouldn't have happened if they'd stayed in indignation and kind of an outrage. They actually shifted, and that was a really important shift. And they're seeing, people around that community are benefiting from that action now. So again, there's the idea that actually things take time, and they had to get to work and do a hell of a lot of groundwork and learning. I'm sure they had a fascinating journey of mistakes and learning and relearning and growing and getting other support. And now we heard testimonies of people who've been helped from that very community garden, Dan, and seeing people being fed. So we're seeing decentralized food solutions, flourishing 3 years on from somebody saying, a group of people saying, I want to move beyond my indignation, outrage into action. So that was really visceral to me, and that's what we love seeing. And that to me is a great example of that took hard work, literally in the ground digging, and it takes time for those things to happen. But that's what we saw in action today. So yeah, all these things take time, and I think getting out the indignation and the outrage is two things, Dan. Obviously it can help you move towards action, but it also can help you to look more clearly at these agendas and these situations, and evaluate them and, see them as they are, and also bring more time and space into the conversation for you, because staying in indignation, outrage can also cloud us sometimes from looking at the realities and getting stuck in the hyperbolic, worst case scenarios, which we've always said we never ignore and fully aware of. But often if we're caught in that, we're not seeing what can be done, and we're not seeing that we do have time. Because a lot of people back through 2020 would have felt like I need a solution to everything by tomorrow, but we're still, here looking at things 3 years. So it is urgent, but it also, there is more time. And I think the agenda, people who push agendas want you to feel there's no time. They always want that because they know how paralyzing that is. And as I said, life does go on. There is time to look at solutions, but there isn't time if one's stuck. You're the only person going to make that time. No one else is going to give it to you. It's there in front of you. So I think it's key, because the other issue with getting caught in indignation, real outrage, is that if you're not thinking clearly, you can get pulled around more by the extreme ideas of these agendas and share them. And what can be dangerous also, that you can be sharing stuff that isn't necessarily technically true because you haven't had the time to quietly look at it and spend that time. And that has a double-edged sword. You're caught in a fear paradigm that might not be actually true in the short term about what you're saying, and also you may be sharing info that is easily debunkable and doesn't actually make you sound very impressive in what you're looking at in your research to others. So I've seen that a hell of a lot, Dan. I think that is a danger, but the way out of that is by slowing down. By actually looking at the info and sharing, not negating the worst case scenarios, but perhaps sharing the realities and showing things that are clear, without getting caught out by the hyperbole or the most extreme idea, because some of them are even caught up in untruths and unrealities. And we talk about the CBDCs, Dan, where I absolutely am against them and see the problem with them, but also just look at how they may come in the most simple form and why they may get adopted because of the technological shift, as opposed to just going to it's straight social credit score tomorrow. And I think that's what's really important, to get a balanced debate and a balanced discussion around, both amongst your own peers, but also when you're trying to reach people.
Yeah. It's so important, because also in that state, not only to become more prone to, potential false flags, but actually in that state of mind, you can't, that, there are scams out there. There are, in the crypto space, we've touched on it. And again, they present that as a simple, easy solution. You must just do this thing. And that's how people get caught out. But it's not limited to financial scams. There are people out there who, there's human nature. It's sadly part of human nature where people capitalize on people's fear. And it's the case that, we can lean into the fear, but dance with it, and not be intimidated by it. And, I shared the story. I went cold water swimming this morning, and part of the reason I do that every day, because my brain goes, my God, it's going to be cold in there. Yeah. But it's to train my brain to say, feel the fear, but do it anyway, because it's not the absence of fear. Courage is not the absence of fear, but it's our ability to relate to it, and we can use it as a springboard. But if we react rather than respond, and respond as a considered form of action rather than a kind of a nervous instinctual reaction. There are times where nervous instinct, our instinctual energy can save lives, but it's about understanding where we are in that cycle. And
and I think Dan just said that people get caught exactly in that energy, which is very important. We talked about the fight or flight in nature. It is about saving lives or saving your own life. But what's happened is some people are caught in that energy, and but not taking action. So it's almost stuck in them, because that actually has got no outlet. And I think that's also from a sort of self nurture point of view, having an outlet for that energy, whether it is come from the fear or indignation or outrage, having a creative outlet for that in building is going to help you, help your family, help your community, help everybody. So again, it's an outlet, a creative outlet, which is so important.
Yeah. No, there was certain thoughts that come in. I've lost my train of thinking a little bit, but to give some kind of comfort around, or just to give some thought into, people are looking for answers. Well, let's look at the social credit system idea first and foremost, before we talk about answers or solutions. It's almost become associated that central bank digital currencies are the path to social credit systems. And I can entirely agree with that and see that is a path, because the ability for a currency to be programmable means that you can attach fixed conditions to how the currencies is utilized, either as incentives, carrots, the carrot and stick as incentives, or restrictions. So that it could be that you gain additional rewards or whatnot. And the difficulty here, Sam, as well, talking about this is I was talking yesterday to someone in my network who was talking about decentralized currencies as physical currencies. So rather than the digital alternative, looking at local alternatives such as localized pounds. Now, in principle, again, that's an interesting idea. However, already I know the Bristol pound, which is in existence, they're already talking about attaching incentives where the currency, you get additional rewards for goods expenditure. And it's, there is no common agreement on what is for the greater good. And that's where things get really subjective, but it's also where they get hijacked. And, there's a much bigger conversation there about, the hijacking of a moral authority and moral code and where that all comes from and how we deem what is in the interest of others. But even that idea, plus you've got the whole problem of interoperability. You can't spend the Bristol pounds here in Dorset. I'd have to get rid of my, so there's all kinds of problems. We're not here to discuss the nature of it, but it's one of those things is that the reason I'm making this point, Sam, is because central bank digital currencies aren't the only way into a social credit system.
Yeah.
So those local currencies are also a way into, but also what we're witnessing right now, and again, we don't need to get into the nuances of the Russell Brand conversation, but already we're now seeing YouTube are demonetizing Russell Brand because of the allegations about his behavior. So the wording is specifically about offline behavior and its impact on their platform. And if I can, I'll find the exact wording, but that is a form of social credit. So it's your ability, your ability to access goods and services based upon your behavior.
Yep.
So that's why, the moral outrage around the story is hijacking the ability to look at some of the wider ramifications. So again, it's not to necessarily lean into that story for the sake of the story. It's about to understand. In fact, I've got it here actually. So if a creator's off-platform behavior harms our users, employees, or ecosystem, we take action to protect the community, said a YouTube spokesperson. So again, that is a form of social credit. It doesn't take central bank digital currencies to go there. We're going there. We saw it with the recent stories of the banks, people having their bank accounts closed because of their political views. We're on a very slippery slope. again, because of digital technology. But again, this also then leads to Puritanism, that we can't embrace any form of digital technology or Bitcoin or any other form of technology because it could lead to this.
Yeah.
Now, again, it is partially true. It does potentially enable these other things, but it's not the technology set itself. It's the attitudes and ideologies that, long before this problem, YouTube, in its heyday, weren't manipulating its material like this. But now
there was a panacea. I don't want to say panacea. That's the wrong word. But yeah, a sort of golden age of YouTube, Dan. Around 2011 to 14, where again everything was accessible, and it's changed massively. So there was a period where it was used, as it should be, and it's not the same beast. So it wasn't that it was built into how it was. It was, it's been manipulated beyond that.
Yeah, so I bring that point up to illustrate as well that central bank digital currencies, whilst they have the potential to be programmable, whilst they have the potential to result in social credit type systems, and they also have the potential to almost usurp the current, financial system and actually further centralize the entire mechanism. It hasn't happened yet. We don't have a British digital pound yet. We don't have the digital euro yet. Now, as we've seen in previous episodes, there are countries right now who are piloting central bank digital currencies. The Nigeria experiment has fallen down badly. You can read about it. We maybe do a whole episode on that to go into the details of that. But the point is here, and if you're thinking about solutions now, if we're only ever staying in the projection of worst case scenarios and therefore panicking about what could happen, we're not actually then coming back to what can we do. Now, people aren't going to like what I'm about to say, but I do believe that central bank digital currencies are a course set in motion, and I actually don't think they will likely be stopped. They may be stopped temporarily. I think there could be some resistance, and I'm an optimist, and I would like to think that there is a way to navigate the world without them, but there's a high probability that they will emerge. But the nature in which they emerge is yet to be defined. So if I was to look at pragmatic solutions, there are probably things that we could do to slow the rollout of central bank digital currencies through the current political realm, although I have very high skepticism about the current leadership and those involved in the current regimes. We've heard things like WEF puppet and things like this. The reality is, I don't like that terminology. I think, we don't need to go down the dehumanization route and using all these words, but the fact is, they're members of the World Economic Forum. They're members of the ideology. They're members of the emerging agendas. Therefore, to try and persuade your MP, who is already of a worldview that is pervasive, is almost futile. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. We have to get clever in how we do it. And, it's, again, how we communicate is everything. But my point is this, and you won't want to hear it, but I think one of the things, I hope you do hear it, because I think what we can do is actually be very clear about, if this does happen, then what is the best case outcome that we can achieve if they do emerge. If there is a British digital pound, for instance, what is the best case scenario? Obviously having legislation to prevent programmable, all of these things we could look at. What would be the ideal? So I think it's not the solution that people want to hear, because people want it to disappear. But it is also a thing that I do believe it's something we should consider, is about how do we get our heads together and say, well, this is what we absolutely will not tolerate. If we have to go down this route, this is the form that we want it to take. Now, I know people want to hear that because they don't want to hear that because they want to avoid the situation altogether. But if you look at the weight behind these things, we have to ask, how is our time best spent? Temporarily postponing the problem or actually addressing the problem head on? Now, I'm going to let you jump in, Sam, because I'm on a bit of a rant this morning.
No, let it out, Dan. Have an outlet. Need an outlet.
The other opportunity then is actually to look at alternatives. And, we did a workshop last week on Bitcoin specifically, addressing how at this moment in time, during this kind of Wild West phase of digital currencies, you can literally potentially transact. Okay, there are some technological steps, but you can within the current realms transact outside the watchful eye of the state using these new technologies. Now, of course, you could go down the same fear-based thinking about what kind of eventualities may come, or start to associate, well, this is digital, therefore it might enable this. We're long past that. I'll let you come in, Sam, but my point is this: is like there are different pathways that we need to assess. There is no one single answer. So one pathway is, okay, we try and slow its progress. We try and halt it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I do think it is within the realms of possibility, but it's going to take an awful lot of work to get there. So that's one option, the complete attempt to resist it. And we should embrace that. The second is then to look at what's the best case scenario in the event of their rollout. And the third is, what are the alternatives? And I think the alternatives is where we get really creative and really innovative, because everything that we're facing now is based out of the old thinking.
Yeah.
We need new thinking if we want a new way of living.
Yeah. No, there's so much in what you said, Dan, that I want to pick up on, which is, and I agree, that's why you educate about the technology, that this is a technological advance, and therefore it's not a simple, we are here today and they want to bring in a social credit score tomorrow and we say no to it. Because there are millions upon people working on this technological advance, which again, is a neutral technological advance. But we obviously know that the people have agendas that want to use technological advance to their advantage. And that's what they're absolutely planning to do. And that's what they're trying to do with CBDCs. So there's two big aspects I want to bring in. A, you're absolutely right, Dan. Nothing is going to happen overnight. And again, that's getting caught in the hyperbole of there's going to be a flip switched and we need a solution before that. This is going to be a long drawn out process. And they've got a hell of a lot of work to do to get where they want to go with it. So again, that's not inevitability, but also let's factor in that there is time to be creative and look at building other structures outside of it. So I think that's where the fear can paralyze people, because they think it's a switch coming any day soon and we need a solution that ends it or stops it or doesn't happen, rather than understand it's a technological shift that's happening. Millions of well-intentioned people are working on these technological shifts. They're not part of any agenda, because it's a technological advance. Now we've talked about this. How do you can absolutely be anti all technology if you want. I'm not pushing any viewpoint. I'm just saying what's realistic. Realistically, we're in a technology age and technology is advancing. And yes, with that technological advance, they are going to try and use that to their advantage. Do I think it's realistic to say we're going to stop technological advances? I personally don't. Therefore, I have a thesis. What can we do? And aside from that, and how can we navigate? So I think it's really important to think that get out of this, it's just an overnight thing. And yes, because more than just the technology, what really makes it work for them is people's behavior, Dan. As you've said, a pure central bank digital currency with no programmable aspect is very similar to what we have today. I think it's really important to people to understand that 7% of the money in the world is digital, units on screens. So this idea of, we've got all this cash everywhere, it's very little even as we speak today. So this rollout, which is also why I try and educate people, that to people who are not clear about the agendas or what's going forward, they're not going to necessarily say, well, stop this, because it's going to look very similar. They are not going to be delivered a social credit score overnight. It will be a totalitarian tiptoe over many, many years. Now, that doesn't make me think, oh, I'm okay with it then, because it's agenda over many years. But what I'm trying to bring in is that, when you shout loud to people that tomorrow you won't be allowed to buy this, it's just not going to play out like that. And also want to educate that it also means you've got time to start building and looking at other solutions. So when I say, look, we are in the middle, like the Nourish community, building value systems that are more decentralized. That's taken them, a few years to grow and build, but they're starting to feed people from a decentralized food network. And it was delicious. It was incredible. And it shows food grown locally with love and in season is a next level, as we all know. But on top of that, it's not getting stuck with all your value in that system. So you're starting to look at other systems and built in, and you're starting to navigate based on, yes, that potentially is coming, but how can we create things? And how can we also harness, like you said, Dan, some of this technological advance to our advantage and use it? And we've got tangible examples of people who've been debanked, over the last 3 years, or are being blocked out of using payment solutions like Stripe or PayPal, that is a social credit score in practice, as you've said. And they are using this technological advance of blockchain technology as a base layer tech to transact peer-to-peer and not be censored by state or third-party intermediaries. That's happening. That's real. I always want to talk about things that are happening real. We saw the food growing there. We saw it being, we saw people saying it's been great, it's gone to communities. I've also seen people being able to transact using some of these technologies, to their advantage, and decentralized versions of it. So again, understanding that a huge technological shift is coming and is happening, whether you like it or not. Whether you are completely anti-tech and you want to go off grid and that's your path, great. But understand that it is happening. So my thesis of, we need to understand that and then navigate and create better solutions, rather than say, is it realistic? And it's an interesting debate. Is it realistic to say, let's stop any technological advance happening because of where certain parties want to go with it and how they're going to use it? That to me is akin to saying today, I always use this line in one of my talks, do you think you could hold back the internet in 2000 or late 90s? Say, I see where this is going, and maybe some people did, and a lot of people, clearly people did see where it was going. Did you think, I'm going to stop it? That's really where we're akin with this technological advance of blockchain technology, which again doesn't have to be used for those controlled digital agendas. It actually, at its core, as we've discussed a lot, can use technology to be much more decentralized, have actually solutions that are against the centralized problems we're looking at, but we need to be educated about them and look at them. But I do want to come back to just saying the time aspect is really important, Dan, because I think that fear of everything's going to happen suddenly and I've got to have a solution now is also what's creating the fear and panic and not be able to think clearly. So know that we do have time, and that we do have time even as things are rolled out. And I think that's really important. That's what I wanted to take out of what you said there, that the time aspect is important to understand.
Yeah, I'll underscore that in a moment as well. And I think the technological progress thing is an interesting one as well, because it shocked me to discover this actually. But it seems like any time there's a kind of a epoch in technological advancement, that there is this kind of huge resistance. And like now living through it, I can understand why, because you can start to see implications. And you require the context of the time to really understand it. But I read that, even during the advent of kind of steam power and then electricity, there was a lot of people rallying against these things about what the implications of these things would be. And, and again, you could look back and say, well, where would we be without electricity? We have to be realistic.
Yeah.
I don't know many people who could survive in the modern age without electricity. But again, there are second order consequences, third order consequences of every technological advancement that aren't always good, and that's it's sometimes difficult to predict those things. But I think this also comes down to thinking slowly and being more mindful of our use of technology, and also mindful about how we approach innovation, technology advancement in the future, because Charles Eisenstein's written about it beautifully, about our kind of addiction to progress and where that can all head. And that brings in all the transhumanist agendas and things like this. And it's all driven by this notion of this particular notion or ideology around progress. And there's so much there. But also, I think your point around the time, and a lot of that urgency is driven by this.
Yeah.
Our mobile phones. We're drawn into, and every time it's not hard. I mean, if I just did it now, just as a random experiment, if I pull up Twitter, let's just test. What's the first thing I say? Oh, look, it's the attached letter from the UK Parliament to Rumble, talking about how they're trying to get them to take down Russell Brand. And then the next thing, online safety bill, so it brings me straight back into the vortex of outrage. Yeah, I could go for a walk in the sun and in nature, detach myself from that, come back into my, breath and just slow down and go, hang on, right, okay, let's think about it. Like, what can we do about this? What's my role in this? And what solutions are available? And I think, I'm harking back to one of my earlier points, because I know it's going to ruffle some feathers by me even saying the possibility of these things emerging, and that we have to figure out what the best case scenario is. For some people, that's going to trigger them. And I can already see capital letters do not comply. And I agree. I feel that sentiment too. But we also have to come back to the realities of, and we've seen it during COVID with every single narrative, how difficult it is under the current climate to actually communicate these ideas, therefore able for people to see what we see.
Yeah. And
the same is true with any one of these narratives, whether it's the online safety bill, whether it's the central bank digital currency, because they've all been packaged in such a way that there's and moralized in a certain way for the greater good.
Yeah.
And therefore, the majority of people are going to sleepwalk into these new things that are emerging. So
totally, Dan. I just want to say, if people's baseline is there's no nefarious agenda, then the same info that we could look at and see all the dystopian, to somebody else, it's the same info, but because that baseline of, well, they don't believe there's any nefarious agendas from up high, they can absolutely by and think that's great. Like the WEF's kind of manifesto. People that can be outraged and indignant because you're aware that there's an agenda driven and where they want to go with it. But if you don't have that baseline, then the same info go, well, I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
And I think the other aspect I want to be realistic about is that when we talk about the outrage and indignation and the kind of real extreme sides of things, is that is not how things often play out. Yes, obviously what happened with COVID, very dramatic overnight. So dramatic things do happen. I'm not negating that really dramatic, rapid things can happen again and possibly will. But the aspect of, anything being overnight or even like we talk about financial reset, I talk about that a lot. Obviously, I give talks on that people always have a view of everyone's going to be made homeless and starving. That there's going to be millions homeless. It's not going to play out like that. And it's going to be a much, cleverer way of bringing things in. There are so many tools to bring these things into play in a way that looks quite organic. It might ramp up and speed up at times, but there's so many ways to do that. So I always want to bring that realism to it now, because I think people say, well, that's where I'm not. I think it's also important to come back to yourself and take back that empowerment, because I don't think one can be reliant on people, masses waking up and not complying. So rather than be, oh my God, they're not going to, I'm prepared for that, and I'm fine with that, because I'm still going to build, And I think also that aspect of, for people who are not ready to see maybe what some of the stuff we see or are not positioned to, is that what's going to be really helpful as things do ramp up, because more people are always going to see that. It's only going to grow. It's not going to get less people seeing what's going on. Therefore, it's much more enticing and helpful for those people if you've already built some more decentralized solutions. If we're always saying, just come and join us in the indignation outrage, that's not a very, attractive, juicy carrot to offer. But when it's saying, well, hang on, you're seeing the control of what you spend your money on. Well, look at these decentralized food networks. Look at these other elements. So I think that's where also you're building for more people to come as well. And that's why the work is so important, because, just to say, I come in the against camp, will actually come in a camp where they're actually looking at solutions to problems that, people do see. And we all talk about that fundamental thing. The more, that's why they've got a job on all these agendas. As they ramp it up, more and more people do see, and more people are looking for alternatives. So having those solutions in motion and those projects in motion is really important to harness that new energy coming through, and that new wave of people seeing or being against. Hang on, I don't want to be controlled in terms of what I spend my money on. I'm not, what can we do? So there are already, these more decentralized things flourishing. So I think that's important. I want those things to flourish, regardless of how many people. If it's a trickle or if turns into a stampede, great. Or if it's zero, I still want to build those solutions for the people who are keen on working on them and benefiting from them and being more decentralized. So it's kind of like the work is the work, regardless how the agendas play out or how the masses or the majority of people react. The work to me is the same, and I think that's where personally I'm able to settle into it, Dan, because there are steps I'm going to take and continue on, regardless of what other people do or regardless of what the state does. And I think that's a place that can lead to more action personally.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I got a message saying, I can't believe you're taking a holiday when we're in a war. And it's like, I understand that mentality. I do. I understand it feels like that, a constant barrage. But I'm like, man, it's been 3 years. Like, I've done 1,000 pieces of content. I've put on like 3 or 4 events, including a mini festival. I've worked with 50 to 60 of the activist organizations. I've been to almost every march. I've been pounding the streets for 3 solid years. Like, it is an act of selflessness to take a break when it's needed. I'm not going to be a valuable soldier in the changing world.
Yeah.
I don't like to consider myself a soldier. I'm a peaceful warrior if you want to put that energy into it. But it's we have to recharge, and we have to be able to come back into that place of clarity, because having taken that break now, I'm actually coming back to seeing like a very clear roadmap towards the future in terms of the creative side.
Yeah.
But the problem, the creative side can be easily disrupted. Now, even when that we both had the wonderful experience of going to the Nourish Gardens down in Bournemouth. Now, at the height of the COVID era, when we were facing vaccine mandates and digital passports and all these sort of things, people weren't able to go into supermarkets. We were seeing that the shelves emptying out, fear and scarcity really playing out. And as a result, people were really in kind of a food intensity. There was a real intensity. We need to start growing our own food. It was like that urgent reaction to it. And again, we can use that catalyst to get things into action. It is something that does get things into motion. But now it's interesting that now that has kind of subsided. I talk to people about decentralized food networks, and they're kind of like, why are you doing that? Like, we've got this, it's like, we've got the online safety bill. It's like, don't waste your time. It's like, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
It's like, that's exactly the problem. We keep bouncing from thing to thing. It's like, we've got to find our path. We've got to find our lane. And for the guys doing, and the guys and girls and all the people doing food building, that is decentralization in action, because people don't often see that, big agriculture, big food, big pharma, they're all intrinsically linked, big finance. And in order to break down that power structure, we've got to start from the ground up. And, these decentralized food structures will long-term chip away at it. And I think it's the long-term solutions, because what we're experiencing today is not an overnight. It's not an overnight problem. The mechanical things are accelerating. And in the digital world, things go faster than ever before. But nonetheless, people have to understand it's the human nature that overlays it. And the way that the current culture and our attitudes, like it's the attitudes and idealism and ideologies of the current power structures that are driving this.
Yeah.
But those will change over time. And again, we've talked about cycles, Sam, many times. What we're experiencing, and there is some comfort in this, but again, this isn't a cause to sit back. We know that the current cycle will reach the edges. It feels like we're approaching the edges now. And, I agree with many people who say it will probably get worse before it gets better, because it tests people's limit. But more and more people are awakening to this now, and they're saying enough's enough. Absolutely. But that edge will be reached, and the pendulum will swing, and it will go the other way slowly. And eventually we'll enter into this a bit like that golden era of YouTube. It's like we'll enter into a period of peace and prosperity and freedom and vitality, and all of these things that we are kind of trying to get back. We will in a way go back through that phase in a different, but it's forward into that form.
Yeah.
But we can't look at that knowing that it's going to happen, because there are people out there saying, I can see the future and where we're heading. I can too. But that future won't happen by itself.
No, it's like the abundance. It's like the, the kind of abundance and manifesting mindset, which, I think a lot of people have experienced and works, but the oversimplification is just think.
Yes.
It'll happen, which is, I argue why things like The Secret are happily pushed on mainstream, because it's not showing the work aspect. And we talked about it, didn't we, Dan, last week, that a lot of the real wise techs who talk about this, older techs that were not coming out in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, noughties, whatever, from the early part of the century, are much harder read, and people don't like them as much because it actually shows, that is absolutely true. You absolutely can, at a certain level, create things, and your thoughts are very important in what you manifest, whatever. But there's a work level.
Yes.
You don't just think about your, I'm using the binary examples, but don't think about your Ferrari and it turns up. You've got to align also and take steps towards it. And I think that's really important, that the work is there. And the other aspect I want to bring in with about cycles, Dan, is that I think it's a very interesting part of the human condition, and our sort of egos, that almost we want to see it all play out, within our lifetime. Therefore, I want to see this shift, in the next 2 years or 10 years or 20 years. And perhaps that's just a sort of egoic view of, because we're here now at this time in this incarnation, that I must see the whole thing play out and the kind of conclusion, rather than that those cycles can be, again, things taking much longer. So absolutely it's happening, but maybe coming back towards a golden age, or, I want to stick away from labels, but what you want to talk about, like, people talk about we're in Kali Yuga, we're in the real dark ages of falling of knowledge, and, that's why we've been controlled and we're coming out of that. That doesn't necessarily mean that's, by next year or in 10 years or 20 years. That could be I'm just throwing figures around here for perspective, but that could be a 500,000 year process, and I think that's where personally I settle into it. At the moment, what is it really? It's me versus me. And if everyone's at me versus me to improve our values, and then those things are going to happen over time. So again, that's where, bringing a bit of time frame doesn't mean there isn't urgency and you've got to act when urgent things. But also when you're more calm and grounded and not getting burnt out with that energy of constantly fight or flight, you are then paradoxically better prepared for when a fight or flight situation does appear.
Absolutely.
So I always said to people, I never thought, they'd be knocking at the door with a vaccine mandate and army on the street. They pushed that narrative for a reason, I believe. I never thought it was, for all sorts of reasons, was going to happen. But I always said to people, but even if that did happen, if you were in a stressed state for months and months waiting for it, by the time it actually happens, you're in no fit state to deal with it.
Yeah.
If you're in a calm, ground state, knowing anything's possible, there is no security, absolutely anything can happen in life. But if you're calm and grounded, and then when it does happen, you're then much better prepared to deal with it. And I think that's where, again, coming back to finding as much peace and groundness as you can amongst the madness, which is not going to stop and may well ramp up, is so critical, because actually that helps you deal with the madness, however extreme it gets. I think that's really important.
It is, it's how we approach it. Almost everything comes down to how we approach this, and the timeline is impossible to predict.
Yeah.
But what's interesting here is also the dynamic around things that we can control and things that we can influence, and it's a layer of subsidiarity, meaning, your notion of me versus me. What we can control is our own actions.
Yeah.
We may not be able to control our thoughts even, but we can control the thoughts that we dwell upon. And if we dwell upon the thoughts of this, worst case scenario world, you talked about manifesting. One of the interesting things about thought is it creates how we feel. What we dwell upon, the thoughts that we dwell upon creates how we feel. So if we're constantly thinking about the worst case scenario, it kind of creates, what's the term, a vicious cycle of its emergence. Whereas what is harder, and it is a challenge, is to then think, actually, what is it that we want? Like visualizing not only for yourself in your own life, but being able to visualize the type of world that you want to grow up in, or your children to grow up in, or your grandchildren to grow up in, because we can see clearly that we don't want these impositions on our life. We don't want this control structure. But what does it mean to be free? If we fall into the trap once again, which again, talking about cycles, Sam, this is all predictable, where freedom becomes freedom for responsibility. This happens almost every time after a period of prosperity. People get lazy. Rather than pondering, they party. And as a result, they let go of the wheel and the responsibilities that go with it. And all of a sudden, we end up in a crash.
I think that's great to study cycles and civilizations, and that's rising and fall, natural cycles of absolute abundance, and then getting to laziness, and then going into addictions, and absolutely, Dan. These are fascinating human cycles to look at.
So it's important also to look at our own cycles and our own cycles of thinking, because that repetitive thought can actually play a role in determining the actions we take. So if we have a clear vision of the life that we want to lead in our own life, one that we can directly influence through our actions, because we can directly affect the quality of our own life through our actions, no matter what circumstances we come from, if we make a committed and firm decision that we are going to do the things every single day that can take us towards a brighter future, we do become an influential voice in our own life, in our own world, and we put a ripple effect in our own families, in our own communities. That is part of the change. It's hard to see it, but in the long-term view, it's part of the macro change. Individual change is part of the macro change. Now, we can also look at the things that we can influence. So what we can influence is the state of the world around us, but it still comes back to our own actions and the choices that we make. So I want to again come back to that sentiment of do not comply, because it's Friday the 22nd of September right now when we're recording this. By the time this is published, I would have been to the march in London. And, I've been on almost every major march the last 3 years. And, resist, do not comply has been one of our mantras. And I agree with that sentiment. And the idea is that if each one of us did not comply, then the things that we're resisting would not manifest. Now, in theory, that is true. And, taking steps to withdraw from the current system is a form of non-compliance. So the more we limit the impact of the current structures upon our life is a form of non-compliance. But touching on what we've already talked about earlier today, in order for that to be truly effective and to stop something in its tracks, we need to also educate others. And that comes down to our ability to communicate with ourselves and with others. So it's an important component, and rallies and things like that are a good way of sending a message. But coming back to our own path of action, if we're stuck in fear and we're stuck in worst case scenario, we create a vibration, whether you look at it metaphysically or just practically. And, we would have all been around people who are panicking in the last, whether it's panicking because they're afraid of the COVID, or whether they're panicking because of the creeping totalitarianism. You can see it in people's eyes when they're in a state of fight or flight. You can actually see it. If we really want to attract people to a brighter future, then we've got to change our state. We've got to change our state, because ultimately how we show up in the world is what attracts people to us. And if we want to influence people's views on the emerging things like online safety bills and central bank digital currencies. And we've got to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, what is the most clear way that we can communicate this in a manner that is going to reach people? And it's very hard to do that in a state of fight or flight.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to, again, 54 minutes in, Sam, what's the solution? We've touched upon some of the solutions, quite frankly, we have. But making it practical, coming back to ourselves, is the first thing that we can do. And, asking ourselves, what role can we play? Because ultimately, if we want the freedoms that we're seeking and we want the prosperity that we desire, that comes back to us.
Yeah.
And that's whether it's individual action to transform the quality of our own lives, or whether it's trying to influence the political regime or transform the political regime or transform the food system. Each of us can play a part. But this idea that you can tune into a podcast and that some magical thinking is going to find the answer, to me, is a fallacy.
Yeah.
I'm always full of ideas. Like, my team know that. Like, I have too many ideas. I have more ideas than time and resource to deploy. And I do think there are lots of strategic things we can do, both in resistance and in creation. And it's part of my mission right now is to translate that into kind of strategic, like almost like a theory of change.
Yeah.
But again, the problem with this is then people go, oh, Dan's got some ideas. Good. Like, I will play with my ideas, but the idea is that part of the theory of change is you've got to find your ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, this is it. Like, we have to get out of this thinking that someone else is going to solve the problem. But individually and collectively, when we come together, we do form the solution. It comes with the need to be patient. And I like the idea of relaxed intensity. Like, that's a concept I talk about all the time. I can relax into it, but I can also operate with intensity and focus and passion in what I do, but not get caught by urgency to the point where it brings me into overwhelm or into a state of, burnout, which I've experienced several times during the last few years because I've been caught up in that fear and doubt, that psychology that comes with it. So if we can come back to ourselves, come back to a centered, grounded space, and get really clear on how each of us can contribute to the change we want to see. And if people are interested in different ideas, this is a time to share ideas, because ultimately it's ideas and action that will create the change.
Yeah.
And, there is a path of resistance, which has some effect, but, I've used the Buckminster Fuller quote so many times that I can't even remember it now. It's ridiculous. The adage that we can't change the old system by fighting the system. We change things. The quote is, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model so the existing model becomes obsolete. Now, I will hand the mic now, but resistance is a way of slowing down the existing model, and therefore it does potentially buy us a bit more time. But if it's all we do, then nothing will really change. So my call to action in this episode is to think, yep, I'm with you on the energy of fighting the old and holding the line. I'm absolutely with you on that. But if that's all we do, then I don't see how things will ever change. So the question to you is, what role can you play? What ideas do you have about how we can create a different future, how we can change the trajectory? Because when more and more of us take constructive and creative action towards a brighter future, guess what? Things start to change. Our attitudes start to shift. The culture begins to change, but we also see the material change that comes with that. So, our ultimate aim with these conversations is to build a sense of awareness and empowerment that leads to action. Because waiting for the change that you're seeking to occur outside yourself, you could be waiting a long time. Whereas you can take action today to make a difference in the world around you.
100%, Dan. And I just want to echo and sort of underline that point, that it's such a more creative energy to focus on what you do want than what you don't want. So absolutely part of that process is being aware of what you don't want and noticing it. But if you're focused just solely on what you don't want endlessly, that's where your energy is. And there's also, what you resist persists. And, if we're focused always on that, we can all look back at our lives and see that when you're thinking about those things, they keep coming up. So shifting that, being vigilant, like you said there, Dan. I always talk about animals in nature. They're at rest and they're relaxed and they're vigilant, rather than being caught in their total vigilance. So it's being ready, absolutely, but trying to find that I'm at rest, I'm present to what's going on. And yes, I'm vigilant. We're not denying there are threats. But if you can shift some of that energy from just what I don't want to what I do want, that's so much more creative energy. And that's where the magic can happen. So I think that's what's really important to do. And, you'll see tangible results. And also, like I said, an outlet for all that indignation and outrage. And that's in motion. And I think getting stuck there is like, absolutely, Dan. I've been lots of London marches and, seen you from a distance at them, absolutely, the resist, do not comply. But just to be stuck in that mantra only without looking at taking actions locally, whatever, is a very limited place to be in. And I don't see huge change coming from that. And again, I want to be realistic that absolutely, like you said there, the old adage of that would function if the vast majority were going to do that. I want to come to, what do I really see? Do I see the majority shifting? I see people shifting, but I don't see the majority shifting. No, therefore, my thesis and my kind of well-being and the improvements I want to see in the world are not going to be based on that outside of me. I cannot control whether they're ready to take action. As I look back in my life early on in times, there were times I wasn't ready for certain messages. It wasn't about the info even, sometimes about people's own fear state. So I think even with the best info in the world and the best delivered info, there are a lot of people you're not going to reach until they're ready. Now that hopefully they will be ready soon, but it could be beyond my lifetime. I just don't know that, Dan. But all those factors, if all those factors stop me taking action, left me, then that's not helpful. Therefore, I can be aware of that, but put that aside and say the work I need to do myself and the projects I want to build with people are going to move forward irrespective of that, irrespective of those two factors. What other people inside are doing and what the agendas are doing, they may have to navigate, maneuver based on things, but they're not based on I'm going to do them whether this happens or not. So I think that's what's critical then. Coming back to ourselves, being the captain of our own ships and moving forward, and almost not getting caught out on the timeline. Moving forward and progressing is worth it, whatever happens, whenever it happens. So it's kind of like, and it sort of hopefully circles back to what you said at the beginning, that the solutions aren't easy, but they are simple in a way. It's not an easy path, and life's not meant to be an easy path, I'd argue. But the kind of come back to yourself is a simple step of improvement on whatever level you can without getting burnt out. Because I also think that's really what I'd call boxing clever, rather than going toe to toe with a heavyweight champion when you're a new young trainee and saying I'm going to take it and get smashed and not get up off the canvas, rather than say I'm going to build myself up over time. I'm going to make improvements that I can do that don't jeopardize my well-being or my own survival. So I think that's my overall message: is take the steps that improve your situation and go gradually, and from there change will start to happen. And no one can say what's going to happen, but if I've done that, then I can have no complaints with myself. And that's really coming back to the me versus me.
Yeah, I mean, just riffing on what you said, without challenge, we wouldn't value the reward. So, that's where the effort part is so essential. But I also want to kind of, in closing, kind of tap into one of the elephants in the room, because I know, we jested it out, we joked a little bit about, you guys haven't come up with solutions yet. And part of that is because there's an uncomfortable reality. You come to an end of a conversation like this and say, I still don't know what to do. And that's hard. That is hard. It's very, very hard when you come to, I don't know what to do. I don't know where to turn. And in which case, the message is the same as it was last time. And, repetition is the mother of skill. And it requires us to understand ourselves and to understand the nature of reality, our own reality, to truly understand what path we want to take. And it's easy to define what we're moving away from, because this is psychologically shown, people will do more to avoid pain than they will to pursue pleasure. So It's easier to look at what's painful and for us to say, I don't want that in my life. I want to move away from that. But it's much harder to say what we want to move towards. And that really does take deeper introspection, deeper reflection, to be really clear on what's most important to us. What's, how do we want to live our lives, and what type of society do we want to be part of? And you could argue it in some ways it's as simple as, I've done this exercise with a friend who went for a painful breakup. She listed all the things that, she didn't like about her previous partner. And I was asking her, what are you looking for in your next partner? And she was just repeating all the things that she didn't want. I've shared this story several times, but I said, well, if you just flipped it on its head, what's the opposite of each of those things? Or would they be more desirable to you? And we can do that. That's a simple way to start, actually, is to look at the opposite of what we're facing. But we have to also look at the benefits and the limitations of the flip side, because, again, one of the benefits of kind of a free life is the illusion of or the potential for letting go of responsibility. That's a limitation. So if we are going to take the path of freedom, we have to recognize that the potential risk of that is ending up in a state like this again. So it is a way for us to look, and again, bringing it back to the self. If you want to look at your own life circumstances, like, are you happy with your own health? Are you happy with your relationships? Are you happy with your career? Your emotional well-being, mental well-being? And then you could say, okay, well, what do I want? What is the opposite of that? And what steps can I take to move towards that? But you can also look at that within your community. What do I appreciate about my community, but what's not quite right, and how can I contribute in closing the gap? Because the sooner we can get to, okay, what's wrong, and start to see what's right, and start to go for what's desirable and what's undesirable, we can then start to build a roadmap between the two, and it brings it down to A to B. And then we just got to look at what's the first step in the road.
Yeah.
But it takes some thought, because I know the reason why we get such comments, because we aren't laying it out for you. Yeah. But that's part of our message, is you've got to do the work yourself.
Yes. And because the panacea answers don't exist.
Yeah.
The utopian answers don't exist in an outward form of, do this binary step. And I think you want to say, Dan, if you get to the end of anything you've listened to or anything you've read and think, I still don't know, that's not the end of the journey. That's the beginning of the journey. The beginning of the journey is recognizing I don't know what to do, and I need to examine that. And when I say that, because we've all can look at our lives and go, it's been a process, and it will continue to be a process. That doesn't mean that, okay, I'm going to make a date with myself for an hour on Tuesday, and by the end of the hour I'll have the answer. But keeping that in mind, just as a constant thing of, what is my role? How can I improve what I do? Is what's going to lead to that happening over time. But again, it's a time thing. That's not going to be, okay, I got it on Tuesday, and on Wednesday I began, and now it's all shifted. It is a process. But I think moving to that and admitting we don't know is a really strong position, a starting point to go, I really don't know. And that's okay. And most people don't know what they're doing. That's the nature of the human condition. And, working towards finding a path of improvement and meaning and improving the situation of yourself and others is a rewarding path. And we're all of us, by being on this path already, of looking at what's going on, we're all on it. We're absolutely on it. But again, comparisons can be odious of where other people are at. You're where you're at. You've got to start from there. And it's always the perfect place to start.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, the good thing is there are also, you aren't on your own on this journey. We're all navigating this together. This is part of the reason we put this podcast, is that so it becomes a shared journey. And there are ideas and answers out there, so we're not, whilst we bring the conversation about to what each one of us can do, the reality is, we don't have to all be creating new businesses or new activist organizations. There are plenty of projects and ideas out there. There are plenty of solutions. And part of our aim is to actually bring some of those solutions here. We've talked about the Nourish community. We've had the chance to connect with that and see the beautiful work they're doing, and that's expanding and growing. And there are so many great stories of things out there. So we don't have an absence of solutions right now. We actually probably have too many ideas and solutions across kind of network. That our challenge is to consolidate those and bring them together to actually help me become aware of them, because the first step of any change is awareness, and that's not just awareness of the problem, it's also awareness of part of the path of solutions. And it's like in the world of business and marketing, the first thing is the customer won't buy a product unless they're aware of the problem, but they won't buy a product unless they're aware of the product. So it's the same. We have to go through that cycle of being aware of a problem and then becoming aware of solutions. And there are solutions that we can undertake in our own life to make our life better. And the world is abundant with information around health, finance, relationships, the whole thing, the whole spectrum of what can improve the quality of our lives. Our challenge is coming back into like what resonates and what's right for you, because it's a deeply personal journey. But then for those of you who are looking for external solutions, there are activist activities, and part of the work that I'm involved in this year, as last year, is bringing a lot of those activist solutions together so that we can actually form coalitions and you can test actions and see how they're going. But it's also to bring change makers together to say, well, what can we do to improve the quality of our health on a local level? What can we do to improve or to test different models of the economy and different forms of decentralized finance? Because that's been a passion of ours, Sam and I. That's why we hosted Navigate the Digital Assets course, and we've got the Navigate the Financial Reset community, because we're looking at that aspect in more refined detail. So there, I don't want you to leave this episode thinking, well, I've got to do it all myself. That's not the case. But we're saying it's essential that each of us takes responsibility for how we want to live our lives. And then we can either use that as an inspiration to start something of our own, or to grow something that we're already doing, or to connect with something that's already in motion. But if we do that from a really considered and grounded place, then we're more likely to make the choices to find things and align with the things that not only best serve the interest of the problem that you're trying to solve, but best serve you as well, so you get the greatest fulfillment and reward from pursuing that. So yeah, I do in a way feel bad, Sam, because I know that there are great things happening to tackle all of the issues that we've talked about today: the online safety bill, the central bank digital currency, digital IDs. There's a world of action out there right now, and part of my challenge with the broader work that I'm doing is to bring that in, and we're certainly going to focus on some of those financial aspects and wider aspects on this show. So have faith. We're on a journey here, and I meet so many people every day who are excited about the time that we're alive in, and that's think about that as an energy.
Yeah.
Walking around with excitement about the future we're building, rather than fear of what could happen.
Yeah, I think that perspective is really important, Dan, because I think a lot of people have been down the rabbit holes will realise this is not a recent thing that's just popped up, and it's a disaster. This is we've lived all our lives under it, and generations have. So it's the beginning of a change. That's where I say, I never say this in a hopium copium kind of way, because I'm absolutely vigilant and aware and have the indignation, outrage, absolutely. But this is an exciting time because it's a shift, and it's the first time a lot of people are having these conversations across the world. So that is amazing. I think, and like I said, Dan, we really thrived off meeting lots of people who felt that energy when we were at Norwich last week, and I think harnessing that energy. None of these people were negating what's going on, but we're absolutely clear that this is an interesting time, and we don't know how it's going to play out, but we're playing our role regardless. I think that's part of the simple side of this. We know we're on the path towards better. We don't know how it's going to play out, but that's a simple thing. We do know we want to create better, and we want to improve things. So however we can do that, there's value in it. And always say, give yourself respect for being on the path, being on the journey first off, and then see where you can go from there.
Thank you, Sam. And just to remind people that if you're particularly interested in learning more about the decentralized finance aspect and the financial system, we have two options available for you. And if you go to weareelevate.reset, you'll see another long form conversation there. But you also, at the bottom of that page, we've got a couple of options available for you. We kind of teach the good, the bad. Well, Sam teaches the course, the good, the bad, and the ugly of the financial reset, and the kind of an introduction to this new world of crypto, digital finance, etc. And then on the other option, we've also got the Navigating the Financial Reset community, and we had a fantastic conversation this week around the role that Bitcoin could play. Again, looking at all of the dimensions of that, and witnessing its limitations and its origin story, as well as potential trajectories, but also looking at the opportunities and the benefits right now. And again, it's about education first. That's really the first step to empowerment, is awareness, it's education. So the very least you can do at this point in time is if you're interested in that area, is to educate yourself on what's happening and what some of those alternatives are. Because if we are going to ask the question, if we are going to state we're not going to comply, then education is one road, but then solutions are another. So both of these courses offer a glimmer of what some of those solutions could be. So go to weareelevate.org/reset. Have a watch of the video there, and they've got a couple of options available for you there if you want to join the conversation. Because here on the podcast is Sam and I exploring these issues. But if you want to be part of that conversation, then the Navigating the Financial Reset program enables that as well.
Absolutely, Dan. I want to say it's great to get dialogue going between us. And that's what's really important. And education is what I'm passionate about, because rather than just being in a simple soundbite, pro or for or against, actually there's a middle space there which takes time about education, and then you can have a much more empowered view and understand the tools of how you might navigate. Again, no panaceas, but tools to help us improve the situation step by step.
Yeah, and just to conclude, there's also a final mark I want to make. There's a there's been some research on, what percentage of people will take action in order to make a difference in their own lives and the world around it. It comes around about the 3%. So if you buy a book or go to a seminar or invest in a course, the typical action rate is 3%. So 97% of people will do nothing. Now, if you've come to the end of this episode, and our data reflects this as well, around about 3% of people make it all the way to the end. Give yourself a pat on the back for making the end of this conversation. You're one of the 3% of action takers. So yeah, celebrate that, because actually you are one of the few. And being part of that group who are willing not only to listen, to take in different perspectives, to educate yourself, you are more likely, therefore, to then entertain action, to entertain the path of action. So celebrate that. It's important that more and more of us enter into that. And this isn't about, we rally against the 1% with the 99%. This is actually about understanding who are going to be the change makers in this time. The people that are actually going to make a difference. And if you've made it this far in this conversation, I just want to say kudos to you. Now, we in our last episode, one of our episodes, it recently reached very close to 1 million views. And that's because people kindly hit the share button. Thousands of people shared the episode. So if you have reached it this far and you can hear what I'm saying right now, and you want to take a simple action, hit the share button if you believe more people need to hear conversations like this. You've made it this far. Do hit the share button and help us raise awareness of this type of conversation that we're having every single week here on the Uncharted Territory podcast.